So I'm walking and talking with lots of moms to be right now, and it's so great. um, and there's so much involved in becoming a parent, and certainly when it's your first time. Although I'm pregnant for the second time and approaching my second birth, and it still feels like brand new in a lot of ways. But I just wanted to share some of the questions, sort of like address some of the questions individually and specifically in the event that they might be helpful to you. And my intention, which can be difficult to achieve, is to not make it so much about opinion, but more about like sharing my process in answering some of these questions for myself, so that might be, give you support in coming to your own conclusion. And I think the more voices we have out there where it's like, no one way that I'm either advocating for or tearing down, but just sharing sort of how I made a decision that felt significant to me and why. And hopefully that will be useful. And pardon my muddy brain as I try to be articulate. So the first question is how I chose my midwife. And the title of this is more, how did you choose your care provider? How do you choose a care provider? And in my personal instance, for both of my births, home birth always was the vision, and not because, from childhood. And I don't have any relatives who had their babies at home. It was not a thing that I had seen. It was something very instinctual. And so that, I think, is significant, that just in my gut, that always seemed like the right thing for me. And here's a really, I think, critical point that I just find interesting. The balance between instinct and then what you learn about this thing that you're heading into. So I had made a choice of a midwife when I still lived in Houston, and then we made the decision to move to Arizona. And so that was really difficult because I had chosen this particular midwife for a reason and had started developing a relationship with her. And then we moved, and not only did I not know any of the midwives here, but I didn't know, anyone in my hometown who had chosen home birth or worked with a midwife. So I didn't have a lot of references or things to go on. And, word of mouth certainly does count for a lot. And having as many conversations as I could, as I started getting to know people in birth work here, and soon learned that a good friend's wife had chosen a home birth midwife, and getting sort of her impression of the other midwives. It's also a very, very small community. And beyond sort of that like preliminary interview period, what has become really interesting to me now that I'm on my, second birth, my first experience hiring a midwife ended very abruptly and kind of traumatically. And without going into that whole story, what's significant to share is that it took this very abrupt, sort of like shocking experience for me to realize that I had hired someone who didn't want to be held accountable and wasn't very transparent in their business practices. And I interpreted that as someone who was like going to, be pretty hands-off in the birth process, which is what I wanted. But I didn't ask questions. I wasn't explicit. I didn't set her up for success or myself. And at 39 weeks pregnant, I found myself without a midwife. And ended up hiring someone from another city. So it was costly to my energy and also financially. Ended up working out really, really well, but was a huge learning. And reflected back to me a longer standing pattern of, not being explicit because I didn't want to be abandoned or told that I wanted too much, or, even risking abandonment. And guess what happened? I got abandoned at 39 weeks and transferred to hospital care. So my second pregnancy, which I'm in now, nearly at the end, I really thought long and hard. Excuse me. I knew that I still wanted midwifery care. I knew that I still wanted a home birth, and knew that I wanted to find someone new to work with, because having a midwife in another city isn't, unless that's like your person, then it's not really a great idea. So to make a long-ish story short, I took a friend's recommendation to heart, someone that has worked closely with me in a care capacity from my first birth through the present, doing body work and herbal support and body work on my son. And she made a recommendation, and I followed it, and I did a couple interviews and initiated a relationship with a midwife. And through that relationship, a lot of dirt got kicked up within myself. And that was even another part of the realization process. And the only reason I'm saying all of this is because I think that it is critical to be aware that during pregnancy, there's a lot of dirt that gets kicked up that is deep and pre-verbal. I know that may sound a little bit kind of out there or vague, but when I say pre-verbal, I mean the imprints from our pre-verbal lived experience of power and care and what care feels like and how it looks tends to inform how we reach out for and or respond to care providers in a position of power. Because when we're infants, we are powerless and we depend entirely on our caregivers, and we adapt to what we receive. And so that proved critical information for me, navigating this relationship with someone who is going to be giving me care at one of my most vulnerable times. And of course, I believe birth is unbelievably powerful. It's earth-shattering power. It is because it is so vulnerable. And so that was something I had to consider. And in order to really ascertain whether or not this power dynamic in our relationship was healthy or not, I had to engage my power, my voice, and say, these are concerns that I have. This is how I'm feeling. And I belabored that conversation. I mean, I put it off and put it off and put it off and really worked myself into quite a state. And ultimately, through having this conversation and facing it head on and asking for support from another care provider and from my partner, I established a really strong sense of comfort and clarity in my relationship with my midwife. And there are so many things to factor in, without getting into it, because some of it may not be relevant to you, but when choosing a care provider, it's what is their track record? One of the questions that I felt I didn't ask my midwife this and I totally should have. What do you love about birth? Why do you do this? just getting a feel for the quality of time and attention that this person is able to give. I reached out wanting to have a conversation, was pretty clear. Like, I just have some things I want to talk through. And my midwife made sure to make time for me that day and gave me 2 hours of her afternoon to talk and to be with me and to listen. That was huge. It's also something that I love about midwifery care. Although, I do think that it comes down to individual practice and relationship. So before I ramble on too much, I will say that the most important parts of choosing a care provider that will attend to you in pregnancy and birth, and hopefully postpartum if you have a solid care provider, is to consider your own tendencies, patterns, and needs when it comes to power and care, and let it be really emotional. Let it be deep excavation work, and not just, well, this person is covered by my insurance or they're in a practice that has a good reputation. I mean, that might be a starting point, but in my experience, coming into birth with an attitude that it's sort of like another medical procedure is not going to serve you. Or I should say, you will be much better served by engaging the emotional and spiritual parts of yourself in your search for a care provider and a team and a vision for this transformation. So I hope that was useful and not too babbly. Please ask questions here and share your thoughts and keep it kind. And thank you so much.